Welcome to the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, where each week we simplify the complexities of your leadership journey.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, where we aim to give you critical and easily applicable leadership concepts to help you along your journey. I'm your co-host, Scott, and I have the privilege of talking about life and leadership with the owner and founder of Rising Tide Leadership, Dr. Michael David Morales, aka Mo.
Hey, what's going on, Scotty? Always good to be here. Always seems like it's too long in between the times we talk. So, dude, I'm excited. Let's do this.
Absolutely. So we're going to go back what seems like quite a ways now. But once upon a time, I was a senior in high school. It's hard to believe,
Wow.
but
That's right.
And like all seniors in high school, I had to figure out what the heck I was going to do once I graduated. And if I'm being honest, I didn't really put too much thought into it. I figured I'd go to college and study something, but it didn't give, I really didn't give it much thought to kind of that uncertainty and really kind of the large amount of change that was about to occur, I should say, just really kind of passed me by. But overall, eventually that all came crashing down like it often does. And I ended up transferring more times than I care to admit before eventually completing my degree. And reflecting back, I didn't really understand a key characteristic that would have definitely helped me better navigate through those decisions. And that characteristic is that leaders need to be adaptable. And I'm super excited that we're going to cover this topic today. And so, Mo, let's dive in with our first point of today.
Yeah. Really, Scott, I think, being adaptable is important just in all facets of life. And you said years ago, right, when you were in high school, it would have been nice to, know how do I navigate through this? And so that's point one today is leaders navigate uncertainty. And I really love talking about uncertainty with leaders because, really, that's what leaders are all about. I say all the time, if things were just hunky-dory and there were never any problems, there would be there wouldn't be a need for leaders, right? Everybody just would do what they're supposed to do. And so the first thing we need to know about being an adaptable leader is that you got to stay composed. You got to stay level-headed in the face of uncertainty, because you see, when things start going wrong and things start going awry, you can really start to point out who the real leaders are in the room. And so exceptional leaders, Scott, will understand that they can understand fear and anxiety in their team members, and they know how to start to navigate that uncertainty.
100%. So not that this should come as a surprise, but often the thought of change and or adaptability for a lot of people can really spike that blood pressure. So what are some ways or techniques that leaders can use to stay either composed or level-headed?
Yeah, well, as my doctor always says, whatever keeps the blood pressure down is what I need to focus on now that now that I'm in my 40s, right? And so you probably actually, Scott, hit a nerve with most of the people in the leadership world in our audience, which is rising blood pressure. It's a constant, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most unpleasant feeling in life, I usually simmer at around a 7. And so, I'm just always thinking about something. There's always something that needs to be, and you know what? I don't want nobody needs to feel bad for me. That's just where I am. Those are the things that I'm focused on, and my job as a leader, and people are relying on me to do things. I'm just always, I'm always on. And so, what are we doing as leaders, right? What is our audience doing to deal with the blood pressure, so to speak, right? Because if your blood pressure isn't spiking at least every now and again, then you're probably not really pushing the limits of your leadership. But there's a couple of potentially things that you can add to your repertoire to both understand, right, when that uncertainty comes along, which spikes the blood pressure, and how to deal with it. And here's the first one, Scott. The first sub point is, there's an old adage that most of us have heard from our moms, right, growing up, which is when you're in a tough situation and something upsets you, what do you need to do? You need to stop. You need to count to 10. Now, some of us probably need to count a little bit slower than others and a little bit longer than others, because after 10, I'm like, my blood is still boiling. But I think the main takeaway, Scott, for this is that a lot of us will just get hasty in the way that we react. And when we're reactive as leaders, I mean, things can start going really, really bad. And so it's funny. I do a lot of premarital counseling for young people. And at one point, I always focus during one of the mini sessions that I have with a young couple is within that relationship. There's important things that you need to know. And here's one of the most important. So if you're married out there, this one's for you. And it's this: don't ever say anything that you can't take back. and you probably know
solid advice,
right? I mean, so you've been married for a few years now, and right, you never want to say anything in the heat of the moment, something that you can't take back, because there's some things that just linger and they sting a little harder. And so for any of us who have been in a relationship, that works also for the leadership world and the business world. There are things that we can say as leaders that we can't take back. And I never want to be the kind of leader that I say something to somebody on my team because they're not doing something the way that I want them to do it, which, I mean, there's a lot of things, right? I mean, we all think our way is the best way. And sometimes people do something and you say like, why would you do that? Or you're so dumb or whatever. Those are the comments that really stick to people. And leaders, you cannot do that. Words matter. And the things that you say to your team matter. So instead, what should you do? Well, you should adapt to the situation when something is crazy or goes bad. Step back, take a deep breath, count to 10 in your head, and never say anything that you can't take back for the people that look to you. Because those people, the people that you lead, Scott, they remember everything, and especially the bad stuff. That negative stuff just really, I mean, I don't want to hear a bunch of negative stuff, right? And like one of my mentors told me, man, Mo, the people that you work with, they have enough critics in their life. What they need are cheerleaders. And Scott, I want to be a cheerleader for my team. And that's not to say that we're going to do everything right, or that business relationships or like family or marriage relationships, but there are similarities in the way that we have relationships, and we are in relationship with others. So, leaders, by being adaptable, you can act as a source of stability and reassurance in times of uncertainty.
That's great. That's great. So, hypothetical situation, but let's say that you are in a position where you disagree with the current leadership of your institution or organization. Right. How can our listeners be a source of that stability and reassurance without undermining that organization?
Yeah. So pretty much, if anybody has a boss or a supervisor, this is pretty much for them, right? Because we've all not agreed with the people that lead us, right? And so your job as a leader is to try to be as much the kind of leader that others would look to you and say, well, Scott is somebody who is under my leadership, and I want to do the best so that I can put him in a position to win and have that stability and that reassurance. And so all that to say, leaders, there's a great book, and I've mentioned it before. It's called Leading Up, and it's got by a guy named Michael Useem. And if you've ever had to report to somebody, I bet you've wished that you've read this book. Once you read it, you're going to be like, man, I wish I would have read this 15 years ago. I mean, Scott, I think, have you read that book yet? I know it's on the top 50.
This might be a first, but yes, I've definitely read that book.
Oh, yes. See, look at that. See, people, Scott is well on his way. So that's check one off the top 50, Scott. That's awesome. So, but it's never too late for our people out there to read this book, right? It gives a lot of insights in what it means to lead up. Meaning you're not in charge. Somebody else is above you, and they are leading you. But it's your job to lead up. You need to help those who lead you. So, and I don't want to spoil the book. There's a lot of good stuff, but there is a principle that I just want to kind of help you get started on, and it's this one. In the book, in chapter 1, it talks about Abraham Lincoln and how he had a ton. I love learning about Abraham Lincoln. He had a ton of generals that just didn't do what he wanted them to do. And in fact, there was a really bright general. His name was George McClellan. And McClellan just literally, Scott, he refused to listen to Lincoln. Lincoln would say, do this. And McClellan would just, he not that he wouldn't even say no, he just wouldn't even respond. And Lincoln, like, even would go to the battlefield and he'd say, what's going on here? And McClellan always had an excuse. And so he did not lead up well because he did not keep Lincoln in the loop. Lincoln just wanted to know what was going on. And it got to the point, Scott, where he pretty much, President Lincoln had to relieve him of command. And it was a bummer because there's a lot of important parts of the Civil War that probably could have gone favorably for the Union, which would have ended the war hopefully a little bit sooner, which would have meant a lot more deaths or a lot less deaths. And so that was actually a matter of life and death, right? And so leaders, you might not be in a position of life or death where you're at. You might be like, Mo, I sit in a cubicle all day and I have a couple people that report to me. It's not that big a deal. And I'm telling you, if anybody reports to you, leaders, it is a big deal. So as you learn to lead up and set the example for helping those who lead you to do a better job, others are going to look at you and say, man, I mean, this guy can do it. Why don't I be like him? Why don't I be like her? So pick up that book and just know that's a great way for you to understand what it means to lead through uncertainty, and it'll get you started.
Yeah, that's an absolutely phenomenal book, Leading Up by Michael Useem, for those of you that might have already forgot. So, but man, what a great first point. So Mo, that brings us to our second point of today. Why don't you take us into that?
Yeah, this one's one of my favorites, Scott. Point 2 is this: leaders continually learn. Leaders, you are never done learning. I don't care if you have your associates, your doctorate, whatever it is, you are never done learning. And so, leaders, you need to prioritize this in your life to never stop learning, because you're going to have to make decisions. And the higher you get, the more your decisions affect people that are underneath you, right? They actually affect people. And so leaders that continually learn aren't afraid to admit that they don't know something. And Scott, they're going to actively seek knowledge and expertise from others.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mo, I have to say that I know most of us are probably all watching our budgets pretty closely these days. And I know that continual learning can sometimes add up pretty quickly. So do you have any suggestions for how our listeners can continually learn without breaking the bank, so to say?
Absolutely. And we've had this conversation, Scott, and I can tell you, I have this conversation with every single person that I coach, and everybody that actually goes through just kind of leadership coaching with me. And here it is. There's a yes and a no to this question. So let's start with the bad news, Scott. So here's the bad news. And the reason that I say that there's a no to this, it means that, Scott, you're going to have to break the bank. As you put it, I love that. Meaning, leaders, you need to invest in yourself. The most important expense that you'll ever make is investing in yourself. And all the great authors, businessmen and businesswomen would tell you the same thing, is this: always pay yourself first. In fact, Robert Kiyosaki says in his famous book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that you should never sacrifice paying yourself to do something else. You should always be paying yourself. And part of that is investing in your future, meaning the way that you continually learn. And so that's my way of saying that you should set aside money to invest in your education. And if you, as you get better and as you get more economically just in line, you'll be able to spend more money and invest more time. And so, Scott, when I was an 18-year-old broke college student living on cup of noodles that back in the old days was 11 cents for a cup of noodles, I remember my mentors would say, Mo, you gotta be able to still buy books. You still got to be able to buy audios. You got to be able to put into yourself. So leaders, whatever the bare bones financial resources that you have that are available, you need to spend that money on your education. Now, Scott, everybody on our podcast probably has heard me say before that there's a couple of assessments that I think are really important. The first one's the DISC assessment. Now, as soon as people start coaching with me in leadership, Scott, like you did, what's the first thing that you did? You took the DISC assessment.
The
right?
DISC assessment.
And then what was the other assessment that I had you take? Do you remember?
Enneagram.
And then Strengths Finder. Strengths Finder is an important one because you need to know your strengths. Now, the DISC assessment, it costs some money. Strengths Finder, I think people need to take what's called Strengths 34, which is like, 75, $80. I don't get paid for doing that. I send people to Gallup's website because I think it's important. But even if you get, man, Mo, I don't have $80 and another 150, $200, whatever. Okay. Well, then why don't you buy the Strengths Finder book? And it's $15. That's an investment yourself. And you get a code, you'll at least get to know your top 5 strengths. Okay. Well, $15. That sounds good. And then for the DISC assessment, there's even a free one. If you can't take the one, if you can't, again, break the bank right now, there's free ones online. In fact, Scott, we'll put in our show notes a link to my favorite free one, which isn't as good as the paid ones because that's why it's free, right? But it'll at least get you started and in the right direction. So leaders, really the question is, are you willing to put time and resources into learning and getting better? Because you got to get on track. And Scott, you don't need to break the bank, but you do need to say, how much should I start investing in myself?
Yeah, 100%. I still am trying to fathom and wrap my head around buying cup of noodles for 11 cents. I mean, that does blow my mind. So
that's right.
But is there anything else that we should really know about continually learning as leaders?
Yeah. The last thing before we move to point 3 is this. I would say that it's your responsibility, leaders, right, for learning on an everyday basis. It is your responsibility, right? Scott's favorite book is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. And Jocko would say, it is your responsibility. And so I run into so many people that don't have time to read. Man, Mo, I just don't have time to read. And when they tell me that, I say, well, then obviously you don't want to be a leader. Because if you haven't read anything in the last 2 weeks, then you don't really have anything worth saying. I mean, if you're not learning anything, Scott, how can you tell somebody something else? Well, you can't. You need to be learning yourself. You need to be meeting with people, right? You and I meet on a consistent basis. I meet with my mentors and coaches on a consistent basis. And so trust me, leaders out there, you are not that good. None of us are. I'm not that good. That's why we all have to keep learning. And you would be surprised of the tidbits of knowledge that you otherwise wouldn't have known that all of a sudden will just come out when you're having great conversations with the people that you lead.
Yeah, that's so true. Reading is so incredibly important. And that's definitely something that I've learned on this journey. And I always make it a point to say that, even if you read one page one day, that's still
Absolutely.
further than you were the week before. So
yes,
man, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right, Mo. So that brings us to our third point. Why don't you take us home with that third point?
Yeah, leaders. Well, once you do the first 2, now we're actually getting into the meat and potatoes, as my dad would call it, of leadership. And here it is: leaders empower teams. And so when leaders encourage their teams to embrace change and adapt, they will unlock a collective creativity within their team. And then all of a sudden, it's not just you problem solving, because what do leaders do? Leaders solve problems. But now all of a sudden, your teams are solving problems. And then the workforce just starts getting stronger. So this often leads us to more innovative solutions, because it's not just you thinking. Now we have 2 heads together, 3, 4, 5 people, and it will give you in your business, it'll give you a competitive edge in the market.
Man, that's really such a solid point. And so
Sure.
I know, though, kind of back to what we talked about at the beginning with that adaptability a little bit, I know a lot of people are resistant to change. So Mo, how do we get others to embrace that in our organizations, in our life? How do we do that?
Yeah, Scott, I mean, really, you just said the hardest part of leadership. Because to tell you the truth, I mean, all leadership is relationships, right? Again, my favorite book, the number 1 leadership book that you should be reading, is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. If you are not reading that book and studying it all the time right now, then you are not doing what you should be doing as a leader. That's what you need to do. It is your job to create those relationships, sustain those relationships, and make those relationships better. Because, Scott, you cannot get people to change, period. People are always going to do what they want to do, right? And so that's really as simple as I can put it. Once you understand that, leaders, it's going to change the way that you try to encourage and motivate people. And here's what I mean. What Dale Carnegie means when he says that in How to Win Friends and Influence People, there's only one way to get somebody to do what they want to do. You want to know that secret, Scott? Here it is. They have to want to do it. That's it. Nobody's going to do anything unless they want to do it. Now, whatever their motivation to want to do it, right? Like if Scott, if you came up to me and you put a gun to my ribs and said, "Mo, give me all your money," well, I still have a choice, right? I can give you my money and live, or I don't have to, and something bad would happen. But I still have a choice. People are only going to do what they want to do. So, Scott, this is the essence of leadership. So, leaders, if you want to help people, you need to help them understand that they need to do the things that are going to make them better. And so, the man or woman, the leader who can figure this out, will move from a state of just helping people to realize things to executing. Those are the real leaders. People tell me all the time that, Mo, what do I need to do? I say, look, let me hang around you and your people for a little bit. And after 5 or 10 minutes, I'll know if your people see you as a good leader or not. I mean, I can just tell by the way that they interact with you, the way that they respect you, because, Scott, as leaders, it's our job to help people do the things that we know that they need to do for both the betterment of themselves and the betterment of the team. And it has to be unselfishly, meaning it can't be, Scott, I can't have somebody do something because it helps me, because that's being selfish. I need to help the people that look to me, the people that I'm leading. I need to help them want to do the things that are going to make them better, right? And so one of my favorite things that I like to tell all of my leadership clients is this. Most people think that they're leaders when really, Scott, they're just poor managers at best. And I really believe that. I think most of us are living in a fantasy world. Oh yeah, I'm this leader, whatever. People throw that word around, leadership, but I've been studying it for over 30 years now. And I'm telling you, I have learned and seen some of the best leaders around. And so there's a great quote if you want to start being a good leader, and it's by Rear Admiral Grace Murray, Grace Murray Hopper, and people actually called her Amazing Grace. And she lived a long time ago, and many people have said this, but here's what she said. She said, "You manage things, but you lead people." Amazing Grace said this: "You manage things, but you lead people." Leaders out there listening, do you think you're leading people when really you're just managing them? Because if you are managing your people, then you are treating them like things, and your people are much greater and much more valuable than things.
Those are all great points. I mean, leaders navigate uncertainty, leaders continually learn, and then lastly, that leaders empower teams, and finishing off with that great quote. So, Mo, before we kind of close this up here today, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Yeah, I do. So the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, and I've talked to him before, and he said this, right? The only constant is change. And so, Scott, if we know that the only constant is change, and I really believe that, then I know, Scott, I need to be an adaptable person. If I want to be a good leader, Scott, I want to be a great leader someday. And if that's the case, I need to be adaptable, because when I hang out with people, I'm always thinking about who are the people who are better than me? Who are the men and women that I just really want to be like? Who are the people that I sit down and say, man, I just want to spend more time with this person? Because, in fact, I learned this a long time ago from one of my mentors, and he said this: "Mo, blessed are the flexible, for they will not be broken." And leaders, that's my hope for you, is that you are flexible, because the more flexible you are, you kind of just like, you're like a tree that kind of sways in the wind, but it's not gonna break you. You're just gonna kind of hold on. And leaders, you can do it, but you've got to be adaptable. So my hope, Scott, is that all of our leaders out there can go forward and get better, and as they take the hits, that they keep rolling. Leaders, you can do that, and you need to be adaptable. And once you figure that out, your team will see, and they're going to start following suit, and they're going to be adaptable people just like you are. And Scott, that's when you start to actually grow other people who are leaders as well.
Oh, way to bring us home with that. Well,
You got
everybody,
it.
that brings us to the end of this episode. If you enjoyed listening today, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. And please don't forget to share. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast. Highlights and resource links are available for you in the show notes. We hope that you will join us next time as we continue on the leadership journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out, and share with others so they don't miss out. See you next time.